Now, the Third World Network Africa is raising fresh concerns over Ghana's mineral policy, arguing that the country's current approach, particularly in the ongoing lithium conversations, remains overly fixated on royalty rates rather than long-term value creation. The organization maintains that Ghana could derive greater economic benefits from its critical mineral resources by adapting a more strategic regional outlook and drawing from successful models in other jurisdictions. The coordinator of the Third World Network Africa, Dr. Yao Graham, made the remarks on the sidelines of the opening of an international consultation on energy transition, critical minerals and structural economic transformation in Africa.
The ultimate benefit from lithium is its use in producing the commodities that, like batteries and so on, that are the sources of renewable energy. And in that process also comes the question about creating new industries which add value, which process and so on. Royalties really are the bottom end of the chain about what we are getting from the raw mineral. Okay, there's a big discussion to be had about Ghana's royalty regimes in general. Okay, but I'm saying that in addition to that discussion about royalties, there's that bigger question about lithium as an industrial input. What is Ghana's plan? Not only acting alone, but in concert with other actors, for example, Nigeria, which also is producing lithium.
Africa's vast lithium reserves have quietly moved from geological footnotes to strategic weapons in a global power contest that is reshaping supply chains, alliances, and economic leverage. For decades, China built overwhelming control over the world's lithium processing, refining more than 60% of global supply and dominating battery manufacturing essential to electric vehicles, renewable energy storage, and military-grade electronics. That dominance was not accidental. It was the result of long-term planning, early investments, and aggressive overseas acquisition strategies that locked in raw materials from South America, Australia, and Africa. But beneath the surface, Africa has begun to rewrite the rules. Across Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mali, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, and emerging exploration zones in Nigeria and Tanzania, lithium has shifted from being exported cheaply as raw ore to becoming the centerpiece of new state-led strategies. Governments that once signed extraction contracts with minimal local benefit are now renegotiating terms, canceling licenses, and restructuring deals to prioritize domestic processing, equity participation, and diversified foreign partnerships. Zimbabwe became the first clear signal. After years of exporting raw lithium concentrates to Chinese firms, the government abruptly banned the export of unprocessed lithium. Chinese companies were forced to halt shipments and reconsider their operational models. The decision sent immediate shockwaves through battery supply chains, not because Zimbabwe alone could cripple global production, but because it demonstrated a new political reality. African governments were no longer willing to play passive roles in the energy transition. Namibia followed with tighter local content rules, requiring partial processing inside the country. Mali, amid political realignment and distancing from traditional Western partners, began reviewing strategic mineral concessions, signaling that lithium would be treated as a national security asset rather than a commodity. The Democratic Republic of Congo, already central to cobalt supply, began aligning lithium strategy with its broader push to control battery minerals as a bloc rather than as isolated exporters. What makes these moves especially disruptive is not only their economic impact but their geopolitical timing. As the United States and Europe scramble to reduce dependence on China for critical minerals, Africa has suddenly become the swing player. Washington's Inflation Reduction Act, which prioritizes non-Chinese supply chains, has quietly elevated African lithium from regional resource to global bargaining chip. European automakers, under pressure to secure ethical and diversified sources, are now negotiating directly with African governments instead of intermediaries. At the same time, Africa is no longer dealing exclusively with China or the West. India, the Gulf states, Japan, South Korea, and even Brazil have entered negotiations offering infrastructure investment, technology transfer, and joint processing facilities rather than simple extraction deals. This diversification has fundamentally altered China's leverage. Where Beijing once negotiated from a position of near monopoly, it now competes in a crowded field. China's concern is not hypothetical. Lithium processing is the choke point of the battery economy, and Africa's insistence on domestic value addition threatens that bottleneck. Processing facilities require capital, expertise, and time, but Africa is accelerating rapidly. Joint ventures are emerging that include lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide plants, not just mines. These facilities shorten supply chains, reduce export dependence, and allow African states to negotiate pricing power rather than accept it. The strategic implications extend beyond electric vehicles. Lithium-ion batteries underpin military communications, drone technology, satellite systems, and grid-scale energy storage. Any disruption or rebalancing in lithium supply affects national security calculations. That reality explains why global leaders, including those in Washington and Beijing, are monitoring Africa's moves closely. The shift is also political. Resource nationalism, once dismissed as risky or populist, is now being reframed as economic sovereignty. African leaders increasingly argue that exporting raw lithium while importing finished batteries is a colonial-era model incompatible with development goals. Public opinion within resource-rich countries has turned sharply against deals perceived as exploitative, forcing governments to act or risk domestic backlash. China's response has been cautious but revealing. Chinese firms have agreed to build processing plants locally, renegotiate equity stakes, and partner with state-owned African enterprises. These concessions would have been unthinkable a decade ago. At the same time, Beijing has quietly increased diplomatic engagement, emphasizing win-win cooperation while seeking to preserve access. The United States, meanwhile, has shifted from rhetoric to engagement. U.S. development finance institutions have begun supporting feasibility studies, infrastructure upgrades, and regulatory frameworks tied to lithium and other critical minerals. The goal is not simply to extract resources, but to embed African lithium into Western-aligned supply chains that bypass China's refining dominance. Africa's leverage comes from coordination as much as geology. Discussions within regional blocs about harmonizing mineral policies suggest a future where lithium exporters negotiate collectively. Such coordination would dramatically reduce the ability of any single foreign power to dictate terms. Critics warn of risks. Processing plants are capital-intensive, environmental management is complex, and global lithium prices are volatile. But African policymakers increasingly argue that these risks are preferable to permanent dependency. They point to oil-exporting nations that failed to industrialize as cautionary tales they intend not to repeat. What makes this moment unprecedented is speed. In less than 5 years, Africa has moved from raw exporter to strategic negotiator in the lithium economy. Contracts are being rewritten, export bans enforced, and alliances diversified. None of this signals hostility toward China specifically, but it does mark the end of unquestioned dominance. For China, the challenge is structural. Losing preferential access to African lithium does not collapse its battery industry overnight, but it erodes long-term certainty. For the United States and its allies, Africa's shift presents opportunity but also competition. African governments are no longer choosing sides, they are choosing leverage. The lithium beneath African soil has always been there. What has changed is who controls its destiny.
You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.